You may feel like you'll always be where you are right now, always at the same level, always feel not enough, always struggle with your temper. No, like with Saul, God has already lined up these moments where His Spirit will come on you with great power, and you'll be changed into a different person.
What happens when America's biggest smile starts to crack? What happens when the man who built an empire out of hope, positivity, and polished words suddenly finds himself standing at the edge of the storm, not preaching about it, but living in it? This isn't just another story about a preacher with critics. This is about Joel Osteen, one of the most recognizable religious figures in the world, and why, for the first time in decades, the future doesn't look as bright as the lights inside Lakewood Church. For decades, Joel Osteen perfected the art of resilience in public view. He became a master at transforming obstacles into opportunities, critics into mere background noise, and every shadow of doubt into motivational fuel. But lately, the glossy exterior that once seemed untouchable has begun to show faint but undeniable fractures. Behind the trademark million-dollar smile, the New York Times bestsellers stacked in airport bookstores, and the packed-out arenas filled with roaring applause, there's a quiet shift taking place, one that can't be dismissed with a well-timed sermon or a carefully placed Bible verse. Lakewood Church, which used to be so full that people had to sit in extra rooms and even watch from the parking lot, is now seeing fewer people attend. The younger generation, raised on authenticity and allergic to anything that feels scripted or commercialized, is slowly drifting away from traditional megachurch culture. Past controversies, scandals that were once brushed aside as misunderstandings or media exaggerations, have resurfaced in online discourse, endlessly replayed and re-examined through the unforgiving lens of the internet. But what happens when the one you trusted most becomes the subject of doubt? Not just from strangers, but from those who once defended him without question. And when tragedy struck inside the very walls of his sanctuary, the shock reverberated far beyond Houston. It was no longer just critics asking hard questions, it was the faithful too. Put together, these shifts have created a tension around Joel Osteen that has never existed before. Not loud, not scandalous, but lingering and persistent. The kind of slow-burn doubt that whispers rather than shouts, a growing suspicion that perhaps, for the first time, the Osteen empire is no longer ascending, but quietly descending. Joel Osteen wasn't born a preacher. He wasn't even supposed to be one. In fact, for most of his life, he refused the role. Joel was the quiet son of John Osteen, a fiery preacher who left the Southern Baptist tradition and founded Lakewood Church in 1959 inside an abandoned feed store. John believed in faith healing, charismatic worship, and big, bold visions. Joel, he preferred cameras, editing, and keeping his head down. In 1982, at just 19 years old, Joel dropped out of Oral Roberts University, where he had been studying radio and television. His dream wasn't to preach, but to produce. He started Lakewood's television ministry, making sure every broadcast looked polished enough for prime time. For 17 years, he stayed behind the camera, directing his dad, editing sermons, and turning Sunday preaching into television events. Joel knew how to craft an image. He knew how to cut the rough edges and make the church look smooth, warm, and inviting. What he didn't know or want was how to preach. That all changed in January 1999. Joel finally gave in to his father's persistent requests and preached his very first sermon. Less than a week later, John Osteen died of a heart attack. Overnight, Joel was thrust into a role he never wanted: senior pastor of Lakewood Church. At the time, Lakewood had about 6,000 members. Not small, but nothing compared to what was about to come. Joel took the stage with no formal theological training, no pastoral experience, and the weight of an entire congregation on his shoulders. Critics doubted him, but Joel had something most preachers didn't: a gift for performance, a camera-ready face, and a message that could be summed up in one word: hope. Within just 5 years, Joel Osteen did the impossible. He grew Lakewood Church from 8,000 weekly attendees to over 30,000. By 2005, Lakewood had become the largest church in America. Well, how? By transforming religion into something that looked more like an arena concert than a Sunday service. Instead of wooden pews and stained glass, there were lights, giant screens, live bands, and a stage designed for television. The boldest move came in 2003, when Lakewood struck a deal with the city of Houston to lease the former Compaq Center, once home to the Houston Rockets. The renovation cost nearly $100 million, with waterfalls, new floors, studios, classrooms, and space for 16,000 people. Critics called it outrageous. Supporters called it visionary. Joel called it faith. By July 2005, the new Lakewood Church opened and history was made. A basketball stadium turned into a mega-church, filled every weekend, broadcast worldwide. Joel's sermons were different. No hellfire, no brimstone, no deep theology. Instead, he offered simple encouragement. God wants to bless you. You're destined for greatness. Don't dwell on the negative, focus on the positive. He avoided controversy, avoided politics, and avoided anything that could alienate. To some, it was refreshing. To others, it was shallow. But it worked. His television broadcasts reached 10 million viewers in over 100 countries. His book, Your Best Life Now, released in 2004, sold over 4 million copies and stayed on the bestseller list for nearly 4 years. Joel Osteen wasn't just a pastor anymore. He was a brand, a global phenomenon, a superstar. At the heart of Joel's empire is his message. It's been called Christianity Light, cotton candy gospel, and prosperity preaching. Joel tells people that God wants them healthy, wealthy, and happy. That by speaking positivity and believing, they can attract blessings into their lives. What follows I am, he says, is what you're inviting into your future. Say, I am blessed, and blessings will come. Say, I am strong, and strength will follow. It's motivational speaking with a Bible verse sprinkled on top. Critics said that it was dangerous. They argue it places blame on the individual. If you're poor or sick, it's because you didn't have enough faith. If you're struggling, it's your words, not God's will. But Joel's millions of followers don't care. They love optimism. In a world full of bad news, Joel offers good news. He doesn't condemn. He doesn't lecture. He smiles, he encourages, and he reminds people that tomorrow can be better than today. For many, that's enough. But here's the problem. What happens when tomorrow isn't better? What happens when tragedy strikes? When prayers go unanswered? When faith collides with harsh reality? That's where Joel's message begins to unravel. Joel Osteen's rise to fame has been nothing short of dazzling, but even the brightest lights cast shadows. And in Joel's case, those shadows have become increasingly difficult to ignore. The controversies that once glanced off his polished image now linger in public memory, slowly chipping away at the aura of untouchability he spent decades building. Because while Joel is quick to preach humility, generosity, and faith over fortune, his lifestyle tells a far more complicated story. Let's start with the mansion, the one that's practically a sermon all by itself. Joel and Victoria live in a sprawling $10.5 million estate in Houston, complete with multiple fireplaces, 6 bedrooms, and more luxury than most hotels could dream of. Oh, and just in case one luxury property wasn't enough, they also own another $3 million home nearby. Meanwhile, Lakewood Church pulls in roughly $90 million every year. Now, you'd assume that kind of budget would funnel massive amounts into helping the poor, funding global missions, or supporting the local community, right? Well, not exactly. Only about 1.3%, a mere $1.2 million, actually goes toward missions and outreach. The rest? According to Lakewood, it's absorbed by production, operations, salaries, and maintaining the Osteen empire. Joel is quick to clarify that he hasn't taken a salary from Lakewood since 2004, proudly insisting that his personal wealth comes from book deals and speaking engagements. And maybe that's true, but optics matter. And no matter how you explain it, the image of a preacher of modesty living like a Fortune 500 CEO never sits comfortably with everyone. Then came the pandemic, and with it, one of the most eyebrow-raising headlines in Joel's career. Lakewood Church received $4.4 million in federal Paycheck Protection Program loans. You know, the fund meant to keep small businesses afloat during COVID shutdowns. The outrage was immediate. How does a ministry with a $90 million annual income and a pastor reportedly worth over $50 million qualify for taxpayer-funded relief? Lakewood insisted the money went directly to staff salaries, not to Joel personally, and eventually returned the funds. But by then, the narrative had already taken root. In the eyes of many, Joel had shifted from being the pastor who preached hope to the pastor who knew how to work the system. But perhaps the moment that dealt the biggest blow to his public image came during Hurricane Harvey in 2017. While thousands of Houston residents were stranded, soaked, and desperate for shelter, Lakewood Church, one of the largest indoor spaces in the entire city, initially kept its doors closed. Church leadership claimed the building was flooded and unsafe, but photos circulating online suggested otherwise. Social media exploded with the hashtag #OpenLakewoodChurch, and within hours, Joel Osteen became a trending villain. Under immense pressure, the doors finally opened, and Lakewood did provide shelter. But to many, the damage was already done. The perception took root. When Houston needed its pastor the most, Joel hesitated. And just when it seemed like the controversies might finally be fading, tragedy struck again, this time within the walls of Lakewood itself. In February 2024, a woman carrying a firearm walked into the church, bringing her 7-year-old son with her, and opened fire. In the chaos, the child was caught in the crossfire and critically injured. Joel took to the stage, offering prayers and words of comfort, urging the congregation to hold on to faith in the midst of darkness. But critics were quick to argue that his response avoided the heavier conversations about gun violence, mental health, and security failures in megachurch spaces. For some, it was yet another example of Joel's ability to soothe emotions without addressing solutions. But here's the thing about Joel Osteen that's starting to become impossible to ignore. The real challenge he faces isn't a scandal here or a PR misstep there. No, the real problem is something much larger, much slower, and much harder to spin with a smiling face and a perfectly timed soundbite. It's culture. The world around Lakewood Church, around megachurches in general, is shifting in ways that even the most polished media strategy can't fully counter. Younger generations, millennials, and Gen Z, are leaving organized religion in record numbers. They aren't flocking to stadiums that have been converted into churches, no matter how many LED lights, waterfalls, or soaring orchestral anthems you throw at them. They want something different. They want authenticity, action, community, purpose, and a sense that their lives matter beyond Instagram likes and motivational posters. Only about 15% of Gen Z attends church regularly, the lowest in American history. Think about that. The generation that is supposedly destined to change the world has almost entirely checked out of traditional religious institutions. And for them, the shiny, polished, perfectly framed prosperity gospel that Joel preaches feels more like a Broadway production than a sanctuary. The messages of wealth, comfort, and optimism that once inspired millions now read like a commercial. Buy hope, sell joy, and don't forget to add some tithing on top. It's not that these young people don't want faith. They do. They want meaning. They want justice. They want truth. And right now, Lakewood isn't giving them what they're looking for. Meanwhile, Joel is in his early 60s, a man whose brand is built on the idea that the future is always brighter than the present. It's a message that made him millions of fans, sold millions of books, and filled arenas with tens of thousands of hopeful souls. But here's the rub. What happens when the future itself doesn't feel so bright? When the polished veneer of optimism meets a reality that is grittier, harsher, and yes, sometimes cruel. Joel's empire is vast, his church is enormous, his media reach stretches across continents. But size, as it turns out, does not equal invulnerability. The foundation is shifting. Attendance is no longer climbing at the dizzying pace it once did. Criticism, both fair and unfair, echoes louder and farther than ever. Scandals, even small ones, linger like uninvited ghosts at the dinner table. And most importantly, the generations coming up don't feel like they belong in the arena seats, the LED-lit halls, or the plush pews. His children, Jonathan and Alexandra, are stepping into leadership roles. But even they face the challenge of building a connection with a generation that didn't grow up with Joel Osteen as a cultural touchstone. They may be talented, they may be charismatic, and they may even have the drive to innovate. But inheriting an empire is never as simple as taking a seat at the head of the table. It's more like inheriting a luxury yacht with a slow leak. It looks incredible on the outside, but it still needs maintenance. And if you ignore the small problems long enough, they turn into catastrophes. And let's talk about the message itself for a moment. Joel Osteen's central ethos, the core of the "Your Best Life Now" philosophy, is that tomorrow is brighter than today. That hope and positivity are powerful forces that can change your life. And for many, that message has been genuinely transformative. There are people who have gone through depression, illness, financial ruin, or the heartbreak of losing loved ones, and Osteen's words were the lifeline that kept them going. That's real. That can't be dismissed. But here's the paradox. While his sermons and books inspire millions, the structure that delivers them, the empire, the wealth, the spectacle, has also exposed him to vulnerabilities that his positive words alone can't fix. We live in an era where Americans increasingly expect transparency, accountability, and authenticity, especially from leaders of any kind, religious, corporate, or political. The optics of wealth are no longer easily ignored. A man preaching hope and humility while living in a $10.5 million mansion with a $3 million backup home? That raises eyebrows. Add to that the fact that Lakewood's annual budget hovers around $90 million, yet only a fraction, just 1.3%, or $1.2 million goes to missions or charitable outreach, and suddenly the narrative is no longer just about inspiring sermons or best-selling books. Suddenly, it's about priorities. It's about values. It's about whether faith, in its most public form, is a vehicle for change or a vehicle for brand building. Even the tragedies that have hit Lakewood and the Osteen family are part of the calculus now. The pandemic, Hurricane Harvey, the mass shooting in 2024. These events shook the church and the community. And while Joel and Victoria responded with prayer, encouragement, and eventually charitable actions, critics and observers wondered, could more have been done? Should more have been done? And perhaps more importantly, would these incidents have been handled differently if the spotlight weren't so blinding, the cameras weren't so omnipresent, and the audience weren't so massive? It's a tough question, and it doesn't have an easy answer. There's also the growing realization that the entertainment-style model of Lakewood may have limits. Joel's sermons, polished to perfection, memorized down to the second, are smooth, uplifting, and perfectly framed for TV. But a new generation isn't as captivated by that style. Millennials and Gen Z crave community experiences that feel participatory, not broadcasted. They want smaller groups, meaningful engagement, and the ability to act on their faith in tangible ways. You can't sell hope like a product to them, and you can't fill a 16,000-seat arena with Instagram-worthy messages alone. They want authenticity, not perfection, vulnerability, not a rehearsed smile. And there's a broader question here, one that stretches beyond Joel Osteen as a person. What is the role of faith in 2025 and beyond? Should it be a stadium? A brand? A spectacle that draws tens of thousands of people for a few hours of positivity? Or should it be a network of intimate communities, a space where struggle is acknowledged, failure is accepted, and true human connection is prioritized over production value? Joel has built a brand that excels at the former. But as culture shifts, as young people look elsewhere for meaning, and as crises continue to test institutions, it's not clear that the Osteen approach will survive in its current form. And yet, for all the cracks, all the criticism, and all the cultural headwinds, Joel Osteen's influence is undeniable. He has inspired, comforted, and uplifted millions. He has shown that positivity, hope, and self-belief can resonate on an enormous scale. He is not a fraud, he is not a villain, and he is not irrelevant, at least, not yet. He is a complex figure in a complex time, a man whose enormous public presence both shields him and exposes him. His smile is genuine, but the cracks are real. His optimism is contagious, but the foundation is shaking. And as the world continues to change, as scandals pile up and younger generations turn their backs on stadium-sized faith, the question becomes not whether Joel Osteen will continue to preach, but whether anyone will still be listening when he does. In the end, there's something almost Shakespearean about Joel Osteen's story. The man who promised that the future is always brighter than today is now confronted with a reality where the bright future may not arrive as expected. Where his message of "your best life now" meets a world that is increasingly skeptical, digitally savvy, socially conscious, and impatient with polished smiles in place of substance. Joel Osteen's empire is still massive. His reach is still global. But the foundations are shifting. The culture is evolving, and the younger generations, the next generation, aren't clapping along to the same tune. And when the applause fades and the arena lights dim, the question lingers. Can optimism alone sustain an empire, or is there something more, something deeper that Joel Osteen must embrace to keep faith alive in a world that wants more than just a smile and a promise? It's a story of hope, yes, but it's also a story of fragility. A reminder that no matter how large, how polished, or how beloved, every institution, every empire, every message faces a reckoning with time, culture, and the relentless march of reality. Joel Osteen built his life, his career, and his brand on the idea that the future can always be brighter. But now, the future is looking back, asking its own hard questions, and Joel, with all his charisma, all his optimism, and all his media savvy, may finally have to answer them. And maybe, just maybe, that answer isn't as easy as a best-selling book or a stadium full of applause. So here we are, Joel Osteen, the smiling face of American Christianity, standing at a crossroads. His message made him famous. His empire made him rich. But the world is changing faster than his sermons. The controversies are catching up. The critics are getting louder. And the future, the very thing he built his name on, looks uncertain. Maybe Joel will adapt. Maybe his children will carry the torch. Or maybe, just maybe, the Osteen era will end the same way it began. Unexpectedly, suddenly, and with the whole world watching. Because in the end, even the brightest lights eventually flicker. And for Joel Osteen, the question isn't whether the lights will go out, but when. So what do you think? Is Joel Osteen still the smiling pastor of hope? Or has the shine worn off for good? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this deep dive pulled back the curtain for you, Stick around, we've got more stories coming that uncover the hidden truths behind power, faith, and fame. Until next time, keep questioning, keep digging, and never settle for surface-level answers.